The Pearl Harbor attack. The Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor began just before 8 a.m. local time Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. For over an hour in two waves, some 350 Japanese aircraft have taken off from the 6 aircraft carriers 230 miles north of Oahu, attacked the naval base. Japanese forces wreaked havoc on the U.S. naval vessels and on U.S. aircraft on the island's airfield. In all, 2,403 Americans, including 68 civilians, died in the attack. In comparison, Japan suffered relatively light casualties. It lost only 29 aircraft and a few mini submarines. So that picture says the USS Shaw explodes during the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th in 1941. You could see just the explosives going off in the distance. The American people were shocked, bewildered, surprised, and angered by the attack. On December 8th, President Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress in the Capitol. His words broadcast on radio to the nation. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. In his address, Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war against Japan, which it did that day. 3 days later, Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, declared war on the United States, and Congress reciprocated the same day. All previous domestic opposition to U.S. entry into the war ceased. The United States was now immersed in a war it would conduct simultaneously in Europe and the Pacific. Motive for the attack. So what is a motive? It was a reason for attacking. The Japanese government decided to attack Pearl Harbor after the United States cut off U.S. oil exports to Japan in the summer of 1941. Japan relied on the United States for 80% of its oil, and without U.S. oil supplies, its navy would be unable to function. In attacking Pearl Harbor, the Japanese hoped to cripple or destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet so that the Japanese Navy would have free rein to the Pacific. So think about that. Japan relied on the United States for 80% of its oil, and United States one day just cut that off. So think about how Japan was feeling. But on the flip side, Japan was also joined in with Germany and the Soviet Union during World War II. So think about why the United States may have cut that oil supply, because perhaps they were thinking they were feeding that war. They were feeding Japanese tanks oil, and their trucks, army trucks, all oil, and their planes oil, all to go and harm other people. So that's the reason that America could have cut off that oil supply as well. Japan was also motivated strategically by ideas of creating an Asian co-prosperity sphere, Asia for Asians, in which Japan could take over the Asian colonial holdings of Europe and United States. With the British, French, and Dutch caught up in the war in Europe, the Japanese believed the European powers would be unable to defend their Asian colonial holdings. Indeed, in the 8 hours following Pearl Harbor attack, Japan also attacked British-held Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaya, and the U.S. territorial possessions of the Philippines, Guam, and Wake Islands. So that's another motive for why they attacked the United States, that they wanted to get some of their land back that the United States took during isolationism. Remember when the United States just wanted to stay isolated and not really get in anyone's business, but they slowly started taking over more territories, with Hawaii and the Philippines being one of them, which are Asian Pacific countries or territories. 4 warnings about the attack. The United States was caught unprepared for the attack on Pearl Harbor, but things might have turned out differently were it not for some bad luck. The United States had broken the Japanese diplomatic code in Project Magic, and General George Marshall, having been handed a decoded Japanese message on the very day of the attack, had sent words to the U.S. base at Pearl Harbor prior to the assault to be on alert. Atmospheric conditions delayed the transmission of Marshall's message, and it did not arrive until after the attack. Moreover, the United States has known that a Japanese attack was imminent somewhere in the Pacific, but U.S. military and government personnel had thought the Philippines or some other area of the South Pacific closer to Japan was a likely target. Pearl Harbor was 3,500 miles from Japan and had seemed to the U.S. government and military an unlikely target. After Pearl Harbor, the United States rapidly mobilized for World War II. So what do you think? Answer these questions through CAN or on Google Classroom. What motives did Japan have in attacking the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor? We talked about that there are two motives there in the article. What was the American response to the Japanese attack? Do you think that the United States would have entered World War II if the Japanese had not bombed Pearl Harbor? Why or why not? So think about those things and put down your questions.